And Alan joins me at the table now. It's been a big year for you. You finished up Great Big C's 20th anniversary.
Yep.
And you wrote a memoir
Yeah.
and a new record. Why has this year been especially prolific?
Well, the record was just sort of a passion of mine that I had going for a while because I knew that after the Great Big C 20th anniversary tour, we had a little planned hiatus. So I knew there was a time to do something creative and cool and to step off the mothership for a while and have a cool, fun time doing it. The book kind of came to me sort of right at the end of 2012. Random House came to me and said, "Hey, we'd like for you to write a book." And I said, "Well, okay, well, I'll give that a go too." And I wrote most of that really just a memoir of the stories I've been telling about growing up in Petty Harbor. I wrote in the book, and I did most of that in all honesty while I was on the road with Great Big C during
Wow.
the XX tour, because there was time. Once the tour gets rolling, after the first bits of press and stuff are done, you often find yourself with a bunch of time in the daytimes, and so I spent most of it writing the book.
And did writing the memoir kind of influence the shape of the solo record?
Yeah, it did. It sort of reminded me of something that I probably had forgotten. The memoir is really centered around me growing up as a kid in Petty Harbor, and I forgot that was a charming place for me to be, and that kid whose eyes were wide open about the rest of the world was a guy that you might want to hear from. In pop music even with the whole notion of pop music feels like lately is so driven or often driven by something really small and folky, in particular like all the cool Mumford and Son stuff or Philip Phillips or, Avett Brothers or whomever, Avicii, whatever you want. There's these humongous pop productions that are really centered by something really honest and folky, and I just thought it might be cool if we combined those two things. If we took the little fella from Petty Harbor who's wide-eyed about the world, whistling and playing his mandolin, and put him in a room where they're making pop music, what would it sound like?
And you did enlist some of the collaborators who worked on some of those records, and Adele's is another one that comes to mind. That is a big pop record, but very intimate and very real. What was that experience like for you? That sort of pop experience?
Great. I really liked it because the guys I was lucky enough to get to work with, first of all, the songwriters like Todd Clark and Donovan Woods here in Toronto, and I spent a lot of time writing songs and producing songs with a guy named Togs Salter, who works down in Ridgeway, Ontario, and he does the Lights records and does Walk Off the Earth and a whole bunch of other stuff. Especially the Walk Off the Earth stuff really made me think of Togs because a lot of their pop songs are huge sounding things, but they're, again, the heart and soul of the song is two people probably playing one ukulele or something like that. And I love how those two things work together for that band, and I just thought it might be a cool combination, and it worked out like so much fun, and it because it ends up being this big international kind of sounding thing, but the heart and soul was still just me. It's just like me and a guitar or me and a mandolin or something.
Were you surprised how well that came together, the pop production with the Celtic roots music? Because to me, I mean, when I heard that it was going to be a pop record and I listened to it, I was so surprised that the character of what you do and say shone through.
Oh, that's nice of you to say. Yes. Well, I was scared that I was worried, of course, that wouldn't happen. I was worried that I would get lost in it or something. And quite honestly, if that had been the case, I probably would have never finished it. Mm-hmm. But every time we pushed it a little further into the rock and roll world or the pop world or the country world, it still sounded like me to me. And maybe...
what is it that makes that possible? Because a lot of people try to do that. They try to make a pop record and they lose themselves. I mean, we see it time and time again. They lose that essential character that makes them special, but you seem to do it almost effortlessly. It's just...
No. Well, thank you for saying that. I wonder if it's just brazenness, to be honest. Like honestly, I wonder if it's just kind of a fella who's kind of going to do what he's going to do, regardless. I learned kind of on the Boy on Bridge solo record, where I went around doing different kinds of music as well, that for better or for worse, I benefit from my limitations. Like I kind of discovered like I have no voice but my own. Like I don't know how to sound like anybody else. I don't know how like to sound like a jazz singer or a rock singer or I can only just sound like me. So if I do a country record or a pop record or a folk record, I don't know, I only have the one voice, Brian, and it comes out like this.
That's cool. And the kitchen party vibe is still there.
Yeah.
You become well known for that vibe, but it feels like it's especially so on this record.
Yeah, I wanted to have the Celtic and the traditional stuff that I learned growing up in Petty Harbour, and especially from Sean and Bob and all the Great Big Sea guys. I wanted to have a little slice of that on this record because I kind of didn't on my last solo record. That was my sort of experiment where I went to learn how to make music the way other people make music, and I intentionally left behind all the stuff I had learned so far because I wanted it to be new, and I didn't want any of my old habits or instincts to come into it yet. I wanted to learn how to play a country song the way they do a country song in Nashville, and I wanted to go to LA and do an orchestral thing on a soundstage, and there I wanted to go up with Hawksley and make some groovy world music up with Hawksley, and I wanted and whereas on this one, on the So Let's Go record, is much more a complete picture of me and where my musical muses are, I suppose, and so a big part of that, and probably the biggest part of my sort of apprenticeship in music is in the pubs of Atlantic Canada. Just before Great Big Sea, playing up and down the Southern Shore with my Uncle Ronnie's band, playing with Great Big Sea all the years through the pubs of Atlantic Canada, and I wanted to give that its due on this record.
And you're reconnecting with that through writing the memoir, and then you also touched on something really interesting, that you got some of this adventure out of the way with the last solo record. Is that right?
It's true, yeah. The kind of worldly, just blind experimentation of the Boy on Bridge record was a real thrill. Whereas, like I say, the focus on this one was really a chance for me to bring me and all of me into a room where they're making the most popular music that I could get into.
And the title itself is a life-affirming statement.
Yeah.
Is there something specific that inspired that?
It's just a thing. It's just a thing I've been saying my whole kind of adult life. So let's go. It's kind of been my call to arms a little bit. It's like, it's part, what are you waiting for? It's part, what are you worried about? And it's part, a call to action. It's part, but really it's the most honest thing I can think to say all the time when anybody ever mentions to me that they're thinking about going somewhere or thinking about doing something or thinking about going back to school or going to work or going out or staying home or going this, doing that. It's like, well, let's go. Like, trust me, you'll regret it way less if you do. You'd rather regret the things you've done than the things you haven't done, I always say. And so I don't know, I'm an active person as it is, but this one in particular, I felt like it's time for a call to action for everyone.
Was that conscious for you, that approach to life, that general approach, or is that just your natural default mode of operation?
It's always been my kind of default mode of operation. I've never really quite put it that way, but I'm glad you said it. It's like I don't know why, but as a young person, I was always really aware that time is short, and even as a teenager, I remember a conversation that in my late teens or early 20s, I had with a buddy of mine. He said, summertime's coming, what are you doing? He said, I'm not sure, but we better get at it. We probably only got 50 or 60 left. And I went, that's true. We only got a few dozen summers left. We got to get at it, And so I've just always been that way about the passage of time and how special a day is and how special, a summer is or a weekend or whatever, especially when I have a 8-year-old son now, Henry, and he's like, if you ever were worried about the passage of time before, when your child is born, you go like, oh my God, it's tick-tock all the time.
Well, you've always had this celebratory feel and ideas in your music. But I want to ask you a little bit about the darker side of that. Your former Great Big Sea bandmate, Sean McCann, was on The Current a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And he gave a really emotional interview.
Yeah, I heard it.
He spoke openly about the sexual abuse he suffered as a child and his descent into alcoholism. And he also talked about the effect that touring had on him as well. Here's a little clip from that interview.
It was the band you'd come out to celebrate with, and whether that was a Tuesday in Brampton, didn't matter. It was still Friday in Brampton if we were there on a Tuesday. Right. But it was soaked in rum from the very beginning. I mean, there's no denying that. And it's certainly, after several years in that situation, if you're prone to have an addiction to alcohol, it's not a great place to be.
That was former Great Big Sea member and co-founder Sean McCann. And my guest is Alan Doyle. From your perspective, how did you see that sort of Friday lifestyle affect Sean?
Well, I mean, Sean he's been totally honest and totally candid about all this time there. And I'm so, proud of him and I think when the whole story broke, especially about the the incident with the priest, I think I sent him a note immediately, and we have before even any of that went down. I've been saying for the longest time that if I live to be 100,000 years old, Sean McCann and Bob Hallett will probably be the two most influential people in my life and the people I learned the most from. And but this whole thing with Sean was heartbreaking, of course, to learn about it. And then I can, and I was there a lot when Sean was there in the earliest days when we could sort of see that he was going to start struggling with a Friday night on a Tuesday night. And he's right. It's a tough place to be. It's a tough place to be if you struggle with alcohol. It's tough to be in a place where it's around all the time.
Yeah.
So we did our best to try to make sure that it wasn't around, and we did our best to try to help him as much as we could, and all that. And but the essence of I think what Sean's message is that if you struggle with the demon that's constantly around you, it makes it all the harder.
It's an interesting thing. I'm a musician myself, and I feel like it kind of creeps up on you in your career, the fact that you're around alcohol all the time, and we all have to figure out our own way to deal with them. I think I'm a little bit surprised how little open conversation there is about it. I mean, even among bands. How did you figure that out for yourself, that balance?
For me, I never ever struggled with it in a way because, I never had an addiction issue so far that I can talk about, but that I know about. Perhaps I do. I don't know. But for me, I nothing ever trumped the concert. Nothing ever trumped the work, right? So I never ever drank before a concert. I still never do. Never do. Like in the earliest days of pubs, we might have had a couple before we did the fourth set or something like that. But since Great Big Sea became a concert band, I mean, I don't think I was on stage inebriated ever. It never, the concert was always too magical and too important to me to shag up the work. And I'm in the Great Big Sea and now as a solo artist, I have to sing 18 to 25 songs a night. So even if I have to play the next night, I usually don't go out. I usually don't drink a lot. Because I don't want that more than I want the concert to go well, and that's partly out of some sort of professional obligation. But it's also about the magic of it for me. I want it for me.
You want to feel present.
I want to feel present, and I need to. I feel like I have somewhat of an obligation to the people who have bought tickets to give them my whole self, and I want the concert to go well for them. That's a big part of it. But it's also for me. I want the concert to go well. So at no point in my career, no matter when it was, early, late, middle, recently, anytime, in the most rum-soaked of it all or whatever, did the work ever get trumped by anything else. I always wanted the work to come first because I love it the most. I love it more than I love the night out.
Thanks for talking to us about that. I want to shift gears now. Over the last 20 plus years, you've become a musical spokesman for Newfoundland and the east coast of Canada. And we're in a musical climate now that becomes more global every day. How important is it for you to be a regional voice?
I never thought about it, to be honest with you, about if it's important or not, or it just comes naturally, I suppose. I mean, I don't know what it's like to be a blues musician from Chicago, right? I don't know what it's like to be a country guy from Florida. I only have my own history and my own story to tell, and that by default, as you say, comes from being from Newfoundland and so I've always found that people found that interesting. And if you found yourself talking, and especially in Great Big Sea, where we always in the earliest days were often people's first impressions of where we were from, and we kind of felt this a little early on. We kind of felt like, well, we should probably say something that's memorable at least or something. For a lot of people in Utah this week, the first thing they ever heard about Newfoundland is probably going to be us. And same with me. In just getting to do some things that outside the band, even like whether it's solo music or movies or television or whatever, I often find myself in a position where I'd say, where are you from? And I say Newfoundland or Atlantic Canada or whatever. And they go, what's it like there? And I'm become aware that, I'm about to say the first thing that they ever heard about Atlantic Canada right now. And so, not that it becomes anything but organic to me, I suppose. It's not a hard thing to keep up when it's the truth. right? And I live in St. John's. I moved from Betty Harbor to St. John's when I was 18, and I still live there. And then it's never crossed my mind one time to live anywhere else. As much as I love traveling and all that stuff, but so I love Newfoundland. I love Newfoundland, Labrador. I love the Atlantic provinces, and I know that because we spent so much of our young career there, we became, kind of the adopted son of Nova Scotia and PEI and New Brunswick, and which is awesome, because I have such a fraternity or whatever we want to say with that part of the world, and even internationally now, I feel like sometimes Canadian with a capital C, like in band, or I'm doing a movie in UK or singing songs in Australia or something, like I get asked Canadian questions, right? And so it's cool, man. I like it, if that's okay to say, but I like it. I like being.
It's a part of your career you enjoy.
I do, yeah.
Well, last week we had Canadian actor Eric Peterson on the show, and he was really lamenting the Americanization of Canadian film and theater. And how important is it, do you think, in music for Canadian musicians to tell Canadian stories?
I don't like to think of it as important or unimportant, to be honest with you. And this is a question we often had early in Great Big C's career about folk music in particular. How important is it to preserve folk music and all that stuff? And I was, it weirds me out to say important. I feel like I'm in grade 9 or something. I would say, look, the worst thing you can do with folk music is say, hey, kids, this is good for you, right? And I kind of feel the same way about telling a Canadian story versus wherever your heart is in your music. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't ask a Canadian, singer-songwriter to please have 8 of 10 of your songs have, the 401 mentioned in it or something, like that. Whereas, I think in the heart and soul of, some of Jim and Greg's great songs in Blue Rodeo, it's not hard to know that they're Canadian, and I don't find it's a problem.
Yeah.
Do you? I mean, I don't find it hard to hear a Canadian story be told by someone these days, and so I don't want to make one of it. I don't want to make a problem where I don't think there is one. Especially
if it comes out so naturally.
Yeah, I mean, I listen to music around the country now. Like I say, I've always been such a huge Jim and Greg fan, and I hear even in Atlantic Canada at home right now, Hey Rosetta and the Once and the bands, the Fortunate Ones and all those guys coming out of Newfoundland and the Dardanelles, Tom Power's own Dardanelles band. There's so many good young trad bands kicking around. St. John's, it's just one little part of a little thing, right? And it's just organic. So don't mention, don't say it's important. Don't tell them they have to do it.
Deal. I think that's good advice. That's a good recommendation. You're going to perform the song "Laying Down to Perish."
Yeah.
It's a beautiful song. I know there's an interesting story behind that one.
Yeah, I'm glad. Thanks for letting me play that one. It's one of my favorites on the record. It's a Newfoundland story, and I thought that, through the jigs and the reels that I knew all the Newfoundland stories, but of course you can never know them all. I was out on Fogo Island, which is a spot you should go to if you get a chance. You'll see pictures of it now in architecture magazines and that kind of thing because they have the coolest hotel and inn out there. And there's a foundation called the Shore Fast Foundation that's sort of reclaiming the island and reclaiming the settlement and repurposing the towns and that kind of stuff. It's amazing. And it's stunningly beautiful and rich in history and all that. And I was helping out the Shore Fast Foundation about a year and a bit ago, I suppose. And I was being taken around a few places in Fogo Island, and I happened to be in one museum kind of spot. And I asked about an artifact that was in a case, and they said, well, that's the gaff. And a gaff is like a fisherman or a sealer's or a mariner's tool, like a long wooden stick with perhaps it might have a hook on it or it might have a spike on it, depending on what they're using it for. And that's the laying down to perish gaff. And I was like, well, what's that? And I was told the story of how in 1917, 3 brothers and another fella from Fogo went out onto the ice. And when they got so far out, the wind shifted and the fog came in. And being, men of the sea, they knew they weren't getting back in. And their first thought must have been how horrible it would be if their families never knew what happened to them. So they took their gaff and they carved laying down to perish into it and their names and set it adrift.
Wow.
And a period of time later, it washed ashore in Morton's Harbor, I believe, and was brought back to the families. It was like a message from the crypt, you know. And I just thought that, first of all, that's an amazing story, like an amazing Newfoundland story, yet another amazing Newfoundland story. But it's also one of the most selfless things I've ever heard anyone ever do in my life. So I was compelled to write a song about it called Laying Down to Perish.
That's beautiful. We're going to hear that next. Thanks for the chat, Alan.
Thanks for having me.